To our friends in Asia, good evening, and to our friends from the other side of the world, good morning. Welcome to another edition of Iron Sharpening Moments. Today, the basic question that all of us are answering is this: that how are we going to adjust to the new normal? A lot of a lot are adjusting to the new normal. The business people are adjusting to the new normal. Uh, our government is adjusted to the new normal. IGSL is adjusted to the new normal right now. We are going full online this coming semester. But the question really is what adjustment do we need to make in order for us to fulfill the Great Commission? Is there is an adjustment that we need to make in order for us to fulfill the Great Commission? To answer that question, we are privileged to join us right now. A friend and a graduate of IGSL, or what we call ISOT Asia in Baguio. He is a assistant professor of practical theology and intercultural leadership at Seminary of Tyndale University in Toronto, part-time senior pastor at two Green Hills Christian Fellowship churches in the Greater Toronto area, VP of the Evangelical Missiological Society, Canada, married to Hazel for 31 long years. And I think happily married, right? So, with two grown daughters, Irene and Kyra, and one 5-month-old grandson, Ethan. Let's welcome Dr. Narry Santos. And joining us also is a good friend and a mentor and my boss, the director for DMin program of IGSL. Let's all welcome Dr. Frank Pardue. Gentlemen.
Good evening. Yeah, thank you, Neil, for that introduction. And we're so excited to have Pastor Narry or Dr. Narry. I don't know what the best term is, but kind of a preview of a class we're going to be having in a few weeks, talking about discipleship in the Gospel of Mark and the Asian context. So those are three big words here, but Narry, maybe the first thing we could do is just kind of let you introduce yourself. You were an IGSL student. Tell us about a little bit about your journey in discipleship and why you feel it's so important to us. You're muted.
There you go. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be home and with the IGSL family. I graduated, I was at IGSL or ISAT at the time, 1985 to 88, and then I also taught full-time 2 years after that. But I think this issue of discipleship is very personal to me. A classmate of mine shared the good news through the 4 spiritual laws in second year high school. But the difficulty or problem I had was that nobody discipled me. Nobody followed me up. So I felt like a baby that was just born and then thrown into the garbage bin. Nobody took care of me spiritually. And so nothing happened much in the first 5 years until somebody did. And when I saw the person who shared the gospel with me in seminary when we were studying, I asked him, why didn't you disciple me after you shared the gospel? And he was very apologetic. He said, sorry, Narry, sharing the gospel was the only thing I knew at the time. And so that became a very personal experience that created a desire in me to disciple people so that when we share the gospel, we don't leave them.
Mm.
We journey with them and take the time to help them grow to be more like Jesus.
Wow. That's really great to hear that. And I know you've been discipling people, many generations of believers, from your time at South Metro, some of the churches that have grown out of that, Purpose-Driven Life, now in Canada. So the other part of your teaching is going to be about the Gospel of Mark. So how does discipleship fit into the Gospel of Mark? What's some of your insights there?
Yeah. Also, the study of Mark and the gospel is very personal to me. I did studies on it for my dissertation in New Testament, and I discovered there that more than just a discipleship gospel, the basis for discipleship in Mark is really Christology, or Christ himself. We cannot begin the conversation about discipleship by being a good follower of Jesus. We need to begin with a conversation about who Jesus is, whom we need to follow. So that's probably for me the biggest takeaway from Mark and discipleship. That Christology is the basis of discipleship.
Well, I really see your focus on Mark over many years is also kind of like a lesson for all of us, that we keep going back to the scriptures, and especially a certain book over and over. That you've made that kind of your life journey, I think, also.
Oh yes, it's for me the choice for Mark. Well, the first thing is because of all the gospels, it's the shortest. So so that was my first motivation to study it. But the more I read and studied it, the more I discovered, boy, I can see more of myself and the people I seek to minister in this gospel. The disciples are presented not only in their strengths, that they were quick to follow Jesus, they were obedient, but they're also being presented in their weaknesses, that they found it difficult to understand Jesus right away, that they were not comprehending them, and they were even deserting him at the end of the gospel. And yet Jesus and Mark stayed with this disciple. Gives me hope that when I fall, when I fail in the midst of my weaknesses, and even in the context of the people I seek to minister, that we can go on even though we fail and falter.
Yeah, there's some great themes there in Mark. I'm just, after knowing that we were going to do this, have been really reading through the Gospel of Mark myself again. And seeing the issue both of leadership, the mistakes that these disciples made along the way. Just a lot of really interesting things.
Yeah, even in the context of being a leader, the very first requirement, I think, of being an effective one is to be a learner for life, that we never stop learning, we never stop becoming more like Jesus. And if that's what our followers see in the group, then we'll be able to see that kind of mindset in the people that we serve.
Okay, your mic is kind of going in and out, but
I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. Technology never seems to work all the time. Tell us a little bit, because we're also talking about the Asian context. Why add Asian context as opposed to just generally studying discipleship in Mark? What's the difference?
That's a very good question. For me, it's important to understand both context and culture. Knowing our context helps us to be able to put into practice where we are the realities of the word. And that also needs to, so context is in light of community, to be lived with others where we are. In fact, I like the statement that says, where we are is why we are. So I call that a theology of place, that God has a purpose why God put us in a particular place so that we can minister to the people and in that place according to where the people are. And that I find in Mark, in our discipleship, that Jesus or begins with where we are. He doesn't begin with where we need to be, although he knows where we need to be. He begins with where we are and brings us on a journey. And the Gospel of
Mm.
Mark is like that. It's being on the road. It's being on a journey. And for me, when I also did some writing on Filipino culture, I see there is a reason why I am a Christian by the blood of Christ, and that I'm also a Filipino by blood. And there has to be that engagement between culture and Christianity so that what we believe in the Bible is being lived out as lived experience in the company of others and seeking to reach the people in that context.
Yeah, that's really so meaningful. And I know just what I remember. I know you've written on this, turning our shame into honor,
Mhm.
something like that. Is that?
Yes. Hmm. Yeah, because especially in the context of the Philippines, shame is a very big social value. It's being used in order to help others become uh, more fulfilled in life, although it can also be abused. And so, what does the gospel, particularly in Mark, speak into that? What are the honor shame values of Jesus in the first century Mediterranean world? And how did Mark incorporate those values? And what I see in Mark is that he reverses the honor shame values of his time in order to understand the honor shame values of God, which is timely and
Mm.
timeless. And so that I think is very important. We begin with what God says about himself and about us in light of who we are and where we are, and then apply it into our daily life and ministry.
Well,
Going
that's
back
really.
to going back to
Mhm.
honor and shame, Dr.
Yeah.
Nari, I think you can understand this being a Filipino. Like Asians, we
Mhm.
value honor and shame, and
Oh,
sometimes
yes.
we bring that to your discipleship. That we disciple people, and those people that we're discipling is basically motivated by honor and shame. So I will just listen to you because I honor you, and I don't want
Hmm.
to shame you.
Right.
But
Right.
actually, how can we really produce a follower of Christ, not our follower? In
I
the
think
context of discipleship.
that's a good question, Neil. In fact, we probably have to begin with the recognition that that's where people are. So they listen to us because they honor us. And
Mm,
then in the discipleship process, we help them see that we need to elevate the concept of honoring not just a person, but honoring the God who is most honorable. And
mm,
so beginning with us because we're face to face, they know us, we know them. And then we seek to bring them to see who God is, get to know him as of course God knows them. So that
mm,
there will be that elevation of that honor and shame value system to the honor shame value system of God.
mm. Yeah.
So because God honors us, that makes
Hmm.
us more valuable, right?
Yeah, yeah. And Jesus uses the language of honor and shame in the Gospel of Mark. When in Mark chapter 8, he says that for those of you who are ashamed of me and the gospel, I will also be ashamed of you when the Son of Man returns in his glory.
Mm.
So he uses that same language, but brings it to a level that what is really honorable before God, what is really shameful before Jesus.
It's so easy to forget that Jesus was an Asian
Hmm.
and not a Westerner. You know,
That's
we
right.
get so used to talking about Christianity as Western. I hear that all the time.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, bringing some of this into the to our understanding helps us to begin to look at that. And uh, Neil, you brought up the idea of discipler. Often in our Asian context, the
Yeah.
Hmm.
discipler is above us
Mm,
Yeah.
and we're below them.
mm,
But then Mark chapter 10, where Jesus begins to talk to the disciples about leading others and
Hmm.
respect for children and all of those different things, he
Right.
really turns things around.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And the different thing about the disciple making of Jesus is that in the Jewish tradition, uh, a rabbi has his own disciples. In the Greco-Roman context, the philosophers also had their disciples. And the goal for having apprentices or disciples was so that they themselves will become Jewish rabbis in the future and become Greek philosophers in the future. But in our discipleship with Jesus, we never stop becoming a follower of Jesus. He's always going to be our master. He's always going to be our disciple. Even though we become disciplers ourselves, but it is not to become like us. It is to help them become like Jesus. Of course, Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." But the ultimate goal is not to follow us, but to follow Jesus.
Mm. A while ago, Dr. Nari, you also brought up the idea of the theology of, I think you call it a theology of place,
Hmm.
that we need to contextualize our discipleship where we are. And
Yes.
one of the things that are happening right now with IGSL is that we are opening up our doors to other sector leaders.
Hmm.
Aside from pastor and missionaries, we have a number from business, from military,
Hmm.
from doctors as well. So how can we contextualize our discipleship then?
I think that's a very good point. The contextualization of discipleship is to understand that wherever God placed us, that is our mission field.
Mm,
We don't always have to think of missions and missionaries as people going to another place in a faraway land. Of course, we still need to do that. We're not saying we don't do that anymore, but it's also important to be missional in mindset so that where I go, that is God's mission for me. So if the mission
mm,
is workplace, in the military, then that workplace is my mission field. The
mm,
military is my mission. So that God sends me as a missionary in that place. So that I think of myself. So the adjustment is I think of myself not just as a believer or as disciple, but as a missionary.
yeah, very good.
Great. Neil, you want to ask any of these poll questions?
Yeah, but before that, Kuya Frank, I think
Oh,
we need to have a break first. I think we are now time for some announcement, and so we have some
yeah.
break. But before we take a break, I just want to encourage our viewers then that they can just ask any question that they want to ask regarding discipleship to Dr. Nari and maybe to Kuya Frank, Dr. Frank. So and then we will answer those. So just comment, just ask your question, and we will definitely answer those questions right after this break. Thank you for that. I think that's our DMin program. So, Dr. Nari, one of the poll question is that of what are some of the challenges that you face or you are facing right now as a discipler, and the greatest reward as well?
Oh, good. Very good questions. Thank you for that question. Maybe in my North American context, time is really a big concern for people. So to actually find time to be in a discipleship relationship is already a
Mm,
big challenge because people are so busy. It's interesting that this pandemic has really changed all that, but even
mhm,
online, things can also become busy. People can have a a fatigue being online or being virtual. The second I think that's challenging is when we as disciplers or I myself go through my own set of troubles,
mm,
when I go through my own suffering and pain,
mm,
uh, and how that also goes in line with the people I seek to disciple, their own struggle, their own pain, their own
mm,
troubles. And and the other thing that I think is most difficult is when they themselves, as a result of those struggles and pain, decide to be far from God. I
mm,
think that's my greatest pain. When somebody you have discipled, after the person grows in the Lord and serves others, and that the person has uh, a desire not to follow Jesus anymore. And I think the third challenge is uh, when people only see themselves as disciples. I think the hurdle is how can you overcome that mindset and seek to become a discipler or a disciple maker? Uh, and I think people don't see that connection right away. But Jesus was a good model of that. He wasn't
mm,
only a good disciple of the Father, he also discipled the 12 and others. Uh, Here's a philosophy that helped me overcome this mindset. Uh, the proof of a tree is not another fruit only. Bearing fruit is good, but the proof of a tree is another tree. So we'd like to multiply our lives beyond just bearing fruit into having another tree. And if we even expand that, it is not just the fruit of a tree is another tree, but an orchard or or a forest. So that we don't only in discipleship become spiritual mature people, but in disciple making we become spiritual multipliers.
mm,
So those are probably these challenges are overcome. Boy, it'll be a totally different world of disciple making. I think my greatest joy is this. Somebody asked me about 10, 15 years ago, Pastor Narry, why are you still pastoring? Why are you still planting churches? Because I'm now a pastor for about 26 years now.
mm,
And so he asked me, why are you still doing that? Aren't you
mm,
tired? Don't you get tired doing the same thing? And I say, oh, I don't, because when I spend time with people and see how God is at work in their life, they are transformed and they
mm,
do the things that God calls them to do. One of my greatest joys that wherever I am, whether in the Philippines or here in Canada, is that when I am able to see people who, since I'm a pastor, I help them also discover God's plan and will for them, and they actually do, and they also become pastors. For me, wow, this is the proof of my tree when
mm,
there are other pastors who become pastors as a result of my influence in their lives. Because I asked, so how do you know if a pastor is healthy? When that pastor produces another healthy pastor. How do
mm,
you know if a discipler is healthy? If that discipler produces another healthy discipler? How do you know if the church is healthy? If that church gives birth to another healthy church. So
mm.
health is measured not just in maturity, but also in multiplication.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
I think one of the issues that I see is often we think of discipleship in terms of the Western idea of individuals.
Mm,
I think what you're telling us is we need to think of those around us. We need to not just think about our personal piety, but we need to be thinking about how are we bearing fruit in the lives of
right.
others, and keeping that always in mind.
Yeah.
That's true. And one of the discoveries I have in this process, in this journey, is that things can be done one on one, and that's good. Right now, I disciple a a church planter from Haiti who is now in Toronto. I also disciple a second generation Chinese pastor who's also church planting. I'm also discipling a second generation Filipino Canadian, and yet I also do group discipleship
Mm,
with leaders of the church that God has allowed me to be part of. Uh,
mm,
not and then with a group of pastors because we are a pastoral team. So So I think that the desire to do it one on one as God opens, or as a group as God opens, both will work.
Yeah. There's another question from Dr. Abraham from IGSL. He asked the question, Dr. Nari, you wrote an intriguing dissertation called Slave of All, the
Mhm.
paradox of authority and servanthood in the Gospel of Mark. Would you help us understand how this paradox plays out in the Asian church context today? How do church leaders and disciples in the Asian church live out this paradox?
Very good. So let me first begin with what the dissertation is about, and I'll answer the question next.
Mm,
So my dissertation is about the paradox of authority and servanthood in the Gospel of Mark. I see there Mark put together these two seemingly opposite themes of authority, power, and servanthood, or being a servant. And yet in Mark, he puts those two dichotomous or polar statements or concepts together. And that's what Jesus does. He says in Mark 10:45, "For I came not to be served, but to serve."
mm,
He also says, if you want to be great, you need to be servant of all.
mm,
If you want to be first, you need to be slave of all. And so he reverses the mindset of the people, and that puts the two together. I think in the Asian context, especially in positions of leadership and practice of leadership, that the engagement of the two needs to be put in action. If I want to be a leader that people will respect and honor and follow, as we follow Christ, then I need to be their servant.
mm,
Somebody said, you cannot ask people for their hand if you don't touch their heart. And
mm,
I think one of the best ways that we can touch people's heart, or ask for people's hand, is to touch their heart. We can't tell
mm,
them, okay, serve others, if we don't serve them. People can only do what was done to them. We can only give what we were given. And in the context of Asia, when there's more fluidity, uh, there is there is room and space between leader and servant. There has to be that very intentional engagement of the leader who sees the vision, who goes before others and serves them in the way as a leader. So there has to be engagement of both. It's not going to be a polar mindset. I am the boss. You are supposed to obey me and respect me, and not a person who is a follower must not be looked upon and said, you're not significant, you're not important because
mm.
you're down the line of the ranks. No, it's the way of Jesus, I think, that we can help apply in Asia how it is to serve, especially when there's a lot of hierarchy. uh,
Mm,
and the way to get through that hierarchy is to understand the way up is the way down.
yeah. There's another question here, Dr. Nari. How do you become an effective discipler as a bivocational Christian leader?
Good question. We just did a research here in Canada of the bivocational realities of church planters and pastors, and one of the discoveries we had was uh, the pastor or the church worker or full time worker understands the world of people in the workplace. So if the pastor or the worker himself or herself would be involved in understanding the needs and circumstances of the workplace, then they can address it in the pulpit, or even have a sense of empathy for them. So understanding both worlds is important, and to also model that to the people, so that when the people actually are in the workplace, they think of it as a spiritual discipleship responsibility. One of the difficulties, I think, in the Christian world is to have a divide between the clergy and the laity.
Mm-hmm.
When there seems to be a mindset that only the clergy can do spiritual things, and that the laity they just work and give money to the people into the mission field. But the important thing is that Jesus is Lord, both in the context of the clergy and in the context of the laity. Another divide, I think, that can, if we overcome, we'll be able to help those living in the bivocational world. There seems to be a dichotomy in the Christian world between a Monday and a Sunday, when it seems to be more spiritual to do things on Sunday because we go to
Mm.
church and we pray and listen to the word. But when we go to Monday, it's probably not as spiritual as Sunday. So if we break both the clergy laity divide and the Monday Sunday divide, that every day is actually a day to live for Jesus. So that would probably be helpful. I'm not saying we take out all the clergy. There's still a role. I'm still clergy. I'm an ordained pastor and I serve in the church. But to be able to see the priesthood of all believers is an important mindset to help those in the bivocational world to live in both worlds. Although the reality is it can be more challenging. It's like living 100% full time in the
Mm.
workplace and also be 100% full time in the ministry. And so the key there is to be able to have rhythms of rest, of Sabbath, of solitude, so that we are energized and not be 100% online.
You know, that's so countercultural to so much of Asia, not only Philippines, where you have the tradition of the religious leader, you know, kind of being set apart, but even in the Buddhist world, in the Hindu
Mhm.
world, in the Muslim world, they all have that same separation. So it's, I'm sure it's hard for, I don't know whether it's hard for a lot of our leaders to really picture that, but it's so important that you make that distinction. And yeah, you have more to say in that area. Sorry, yeah,
Sorry about that. I think I'm breaking some. Can you hear me?
yeah,
Not not
but it's down sometimes.
yeah.
Okay.
It goes up and down. Yeah, maybe without your earphones, maybe that would.
Okay. Hello.
There
Yeah,
we go.
Can
better.
you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that kind of mindset needs to be something that we will all reinforce. Uh, that yes, God called some to be full time in ministry, and we will continue to respect them and honor them.
Mm.
Uh, but there has to be a sense that everybody in the church or everybody in the ministry needs to own this, that they too are called to be on mission with God.
There's another question here, Dr. Nari, from John Leones, one of our faculty. What are some uh, pitfalls of uh, Christian discipleship from the Gospel of Mark that Christians and Christian leaders should carefully watch out?
Great question. I think we can learn those pitfalls from the disciples uh, when when they were misunderstanding Jesus, when they were engaged in incomprehension and finally in deserting him uh, through betrayal, denial, and leaving him even at the cross. Uh, I think the reason why there was that sense of falling or failure is because they weren't listening to Jesus.
Yeah.
Remember at the Transfiguration, uh, Peter, James, and John were with Jesus, and Moses and Elijah show up. And the first instinct of Peter was to say, "Oh, let's have three booths to honor these three."
Mm.
What is interesting is there was a voice from heaven, the Father, Heavenly Father, who spoke and said, "This is my beloved Son. Listen." It's not what Moses is. It's not what Elijah is. It's who Jesus is that matters. And so listening to him means being open to be changed by him, to get out of our comfort zone and to do things the way Jesus wants. And what they were uncomfortable in listening to Jesus about is the way of servanthood and the way of serving others. Jesus had three passion predictions: chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. And for each of these passion predictions, the disciples misunderstand. And the second misunderstanding in chapter 9 is because they were arguing among themselves who
Mm-mm.
was the greatest. They were really listening to Jesus that the way of greatness is the way of serving others.
Mm.
And then if you go to the third passion prediction of Jesus in chapter 10, after Jesus gives the prediction, James and John come to Jesus and say, "We'd like for you to do this for us." It's like the master speaking. They were asking the master to do something for them. And Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?"
Mm.
Wow, what a very selfless question. And then he tells them, "Oh, in the place of glory, make us sit on the right, make us sit on the left."
Mm.
And they are really having this mindset of honor, honoring themselves, finding their way of honor. But Jesus is saying, if you really want to be honorable, you need to be slave of all. You need to be able to serve others. And so I think the first pitfall is they didn't listen to the ways of Jesus. In fact, the first misunderstanding was Peter saying, after he said, "You are the Christ," in answer to Jesus' question, "Who do you say I am?" And then when Jesus says that I will go through my passion, the religious leaders will make me suffer, and I'll die on the third day, I'll rise again. What does Peter do? He said he rebukes Jesus, takes him aside, and he says that will never happen. And Jesus calls him Satan. "Get thee behind me, Satan." And Jesus says the reason he calls Peter that is because he's thinking the things of men, not the things of God. Listening is to the point that we are more interested in the things of God than in the ways of man. So I think those two pitfalls can help us really be more careful in our own discipleship. Who are we to listen to?
Mm.
Persons or Jesus? Who do we want to follow? And what do we want to follow? Jesus and the ways of Jesus. So I think those two things can help us guard against and be watchful for in our own disciple making.
Yeah. Another question, Dr. Naris, from one of our viewer: how do we avoid, as a discipler, owning our disciple?
What's the last part again?
There's a question of like there's a pitfall of a discipler, like you own your disciple, like you are
Owning.
mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do
That's a
you how
very,
do you prevent that?
I think the beginning has to be the mindset of they are not my disciples.
Mm.
Uh, when I was serving with Saddleback Church in the Philippines with Pastor Rick Warren, one of the lessons he taught the campus pastors this: you need to hold your ministry, including the people in your ministry, loosely. It's like making sure that your hand is open, because if you close your hand and say this is yours, this is your ministry, then we lose sight of the big picture, which is God Himself. So it's very important to always think, hold our disciples and our ministry loosely, that God can choose to take them anytime.
Mm.
And that's fine because they are not ours in the first place. And I think one of the tests for that is when they choose to do things that probably is not going to be your choice. For example, you disciple them, teach them to become a pastor, and then all of a sudden they want to be a missionary. That's fine.
Mm.
Like extending my ministry in the mission field where I myself cannot go. So instead of owning them and saying, "Okay, I want you to be here. I want you to do this," the mindset is they become an extension of my ministry. They're
Mm.
able to go to places that I myself cannot go. So if that disciple goes to a particular country in Asia, then it's as if I am ministering in Asia, even though I cannot be in Asia myself.
Mm. Very good. Very good. Okay, Frank, is there anything you want to ask?
Well, I'm just, yeah, I'm taking all this in because I see also in the some of Jesus's parables there in Mark about the planting of the seed and the where the weeds grow up with the plants. That yeah, this open-handedness, we can't really control what God's doing in the lives of people, but God's already at work, and so we
Yes.
need to recognize that and try to work with the people that we can. But yeah, the danger is always when you get into some of this discipleship. Sometimes there's, well, I call it spiritual abuse, where you're trying to control people's lives rather than really listen, like you say, listening to God, letting Jesus. And one thing that I also think of is the idea of Jesus. We use the word Messiah and Christos and Philippine context, but it really transliterates into or translates into king or the idea of Lord. And sometimes we don't allow him to be that Lord in our discipleship process. We take over, which is
Yes.
kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think if there's any theology that needs to guide our disciple making, is a three-word theology, which is Jesus is Lord. Of all the confessions that we will make in the future, there will be one in Philippians chapter 2. Every knee should bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And when we understand that Jesus Christ is Lord, then it means I need to submit to his lordship. I had to submit to his leadership. I am not in control. He is in control. He is in charge. I am not in charge. And so when I understand the lordship of God over my life, and also the lordship of Jesus in the disciples I seek to love and minister to, then I will be free to release them when God, who is in charge, tells them to go.
Yeah, wonderful. That's really
We
perfect.
will, sorry, Kuya Frank, but we will go for another break, Dr. Narry. But right after the break, I want for you to prepare because a number of our viewers would like to hear some personal stories. So I want for you to share to us your personal journey of discipleship, and then who's discipling you right now, and
Sure.
those people that made a mark on your life.
I love
So okay, so let's watch this video again, and after that, we will come back to your story.
The current global pandemic brought the world more agony than ever. As we continue to lament, we ought to be asking the question, how can we become faithful followers of Jesus in the midst of suffering and pain? Needless to say, a better understanding of discipleship is an ever-growing need of the global church, especially in these unprecedented and uncharted times. Discipleship is a central theme in the Gospel of Mark. It unpacks the way of discipleship in a time of suffering, as modeled by Jesus, the suffering Messiah. How relevant are discipleship principles in the Gospel of Mark in our Asian church setting? Dr. Narry Santos is teaching a Doctor of Ministry course on discipleship in the Gospel of Mark in the Asian context, which is an online course running from August 10th to 21st. Log on to www.igsl.asia for more information about our academic programs.
Thank you so much. So, are you ready to share your life, Dr. Nari?
Sure,
Your
sure.
discipleship process?
Yeah.
Okay.
So remember I told you about feeling like a spiritual orphan after being born. I'm left. So that happened in 5 years. But what I am so blessed with is after 5 years, there was someone, his name is Carlos Pena. He was a student with me at Campus Crusade, then at University of the Philippines, and he took me under his wings. And the best lesson I learned from him is he modeled character, the character of Christ to me. We were classmates in many courses, and I would ask him after receiving the results of our exams, I would get a low grade. I would be so sad, and he would be so calm, cool, and collected. I asked him, "What grade did you get?" He was even lower than my grade, but he was not upset about it. Oh, because I did my best, and God is with me; He will take care of me. So I learned the, from him the model of character. And then Ardina, who was a great discipler, taught me the value of doing things well, of competence. If you do ministry, you need to be able to do it well. And then when I went to IGSL or ISET at the time, Tom Rojas was my discipler. He taught me the value of care. Uh, in fact, he was so caring that, boy, I was so touched. I made him the best man in our wedding. And then we were together at Dallas Seminary when we were taking our Ph.D. there. So that was God's journey with me. And then when I was in Dallas, a pastor, Luis Pantoja, he discipled me. Everything I knew about pastoring, I learned from Pastor Luis. And then when I was part of Saddleback, I knew what it was to be discipled by Rick Warren in having courtside seat. And so what I see here is God was journeying with me despite my very slow start. He caught up and said, "You know what? I'm going to give you godly men who will speak into your life. And so do the same to others." And so that's my desire. Wherever I go, whether I pastor in the Philippines or here, whether I'm teaching, I'd like to be involved in people's lives. Like Kaloy spoke into my life, like Art did, like Tom did, like Luis and Rick did, so that I can transfer what was given to me. Right now, since I'm full-time and teaching in Tyndale University, the one who disciples me is a colleague who is in theology, and the area that he speaks into my life to is in the area of writing. He is a model of really not just teaching, but helping what we have studied, applied to be shared with others through the writing of books. So it's good that in every journey of life, God gives me a godly person who ministers to me and who also can inspire me to also keep ministering to others.
And that's what good thing about our God. It's a very personal God. You know, He takes care of us and He allow us to be with a person that will help us be a better person and be the kind of person God wants us to be.
And what I find amazing is in whatever area of need that we need working on by God, He brings the person who can help us work on those needs. So it's really amazing. It's the same concept with church. God brings into the church or in the ministry the people who need to work or help at that time in that place. And so when people leave, we don't bemoan it because God will now be using them in another place with other people in the same way as they used them with me and in the ministry that I am in.
Yeah. There's one. Sorry, Kuya Frank.
Yeah, I know I don't know how we're doing on time here, but I wanted to ask a question about legacy. A lot of our people listening have their own discipleship. Some things are going well, some are not going well. What is the legacy? I think you've kind of said it. The legacy is making generations of disciples, disciples who make disciples. But anything that you would add to that to encourage people and their different roles out there?
For me, I think my most important legacy will be the three lessons I learned in discipleship in its full journey. I think my legacy is if I can be a person of character. If I can model what it means to to be more like Jesus, I think that's the most important legacy you can have. But the second is also to be a person of care. Carlos Caloy was a model of character to me. May I be that kind of person to others, that I become a person of character, a model of being more like Christ. The second is like Tom was to me, a person of care. May I also be a person of care, that I will seek to minister, that I will seek to serve others. And the third is I'd like to be a person who would be a person of competence, that I will not just be a person who is good, I'm also good for something. I do something well and I do it effectively. And I think this three C's, character, care, and competence, if this is what I live out and desire that others would do the same, boy, that would be the greatest compliment of my life. And the basis for me in this character, care, and competence, being a model who ministers and mentors, is Psalm 78:72. When David is spoken of, at the end of that very discouraging psalm, the psalmist says in verse 52, but David shepherded them, referring to Israel,
Mm.
integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. So I see there the importance of being a model of character through the words with integrity of heart. And then the shepherding or the care is seen, and David shepherded them. He cared for them, he ministered to them. And then the competence is seen in the words, with skillful hands, he led them. I think the intersection of the three, the more we model and the more we minister, the more we mentor in this three, and the intersection of the three becoming bigger, becoming more like Christ is what happens.
Mm. Yeah, there's
Right.
another question, Dr. Nari. In the area of caring for our people, one question was asked: what is the best thing to do with the weeds inside the church who is influencing uh, the body of Christ badly?
Mhm. Very nice. Well, the first thing that I think of is what Frank mentioned earlier about the parable of the weeds. Remember, there were weeds that were planted by the enemy along with the seeds and the good plant or the wheat. And so I think we don't put people out, but we love them. And yet, if they create so much noise, so much damage to the church, then there has to be a corporate way by which the person can be addressed. You are not really helping the church, you are harming the church or this ministry, then there can be a loving way to help that person be confronted. And if there's need for intervention, then we seek to do that with that person or group of persons. So what I'm saying is we do it in a loving way. We address, because I think the combination of truth and love needs to always be there. Because if we only talk about truth, I like what Howard Hendricks said, that truth without love is brutality. Love without truth is sentimentality. So we need to have that healthy tension of grace or being loving and then also being truthful. And how to do that is really the discernment process that leaders need to engage in. So that even if they leave, and if they really have to, they need to, then we bless them as they leave. we don't end up as enemies for life because they
Mm.
love each other. No, we bless them. There may be another church or ministry where God can really use you, maybe not here, but somewhere else. So we bless them. But we also make them see. We mirror before them. These are the things that I think needs to be worked on in your life. But it's up to you. It's between you and God. But we're here to gently remind you of the need for you to grow in this area. But it seems like it's not possible for us to be working or serving together. And so we bless you.
We're almost at the towards the end of our webinar, but I think we have to ask this question of how can we actually make disciple and in this pandemic times.
Mm.
How do we actually make disciple when we are not even allowed to talk to a person, when we are mandated to have physical distancing? So how can we accomplish that mandate?
For us in our churches here, what we have done is do our discipleship virtual. And so what I've done is to still meet with the pastors via Zoom. And then for the leaders of the churches, we said since it's very hard to meet in person, why don't we have our discipleship series online? And so in fact, before I do the discipleship in Mark and the Asian context in August, we are already doing that with the leaders and pastors of the church. And so we did online. Here's another way we can do it on a personal level, even though we are virtual. There is a I'd like to give you this link. It's called disciplemakingstages.com. This is an individualized approach to disciple making.
Can you repeat that again, Dr. Nari?
Disciple making stages. One word.
Disciple making stages.com.
.com. So a person who wants to be discipled and wants to disciple will go have a personal assessment of their stage in discipleship. Are you a believer? That means somebody's feeding you. Are you a disciple? Are you self-feeding? Are you a discipler? Are you feeding others? So when you assess where you are, your discipleship journey will be based on where you are. And the discipler will see that assessment and begin with the needs of that disciple and journey with that person, beginning with where that person is. So it can still be done online. Discipleship, like you were saying at the introduction of our time together, we just need to make adjustments, but we do the same thing. We have the same message, we do it in a different way.
Correct. Kuya Frank, is there anything?
Yeah, let me just add, we're really looking forward to this class with Narry. Now, it's a Doctor of Ministry class, and we really want, especially a lot of you out there who are in ministry, to be a part of our Doctor of Ministry program. That is, it's the practical and the spiritual together, just like Narry has been sharing with us today. So that class is August 10 to 21, I believe. And so if you're interested, go to our website and sign up for this. I'm really looking forward to these continued discussions over those 2 weeks that we'll be meeting in the mornings. And just so much appreciate. I've watched you from afar, Pastor Narry, your ministry, and just so thankful for you, and look forward to hearing more from you, more in-depth teaching and study.
Yeah, thank you, Kuya Frank. And so we are about, what, 2 minutes from ending this webinar. But maybe one last word from Dr. Nari, maybe encouragement to encouraging our graduates of ISET Asia and IGSL.
Yes, I'd love to. So having been part of IGSL and in the ministry, I think God has really prepared us through IGSL to be in the ministry where God places us. So continue being faithful. I know these are difficult times. There's a lot of adjustment, pain, suffering because of the pandemic. But if we remain faithful, God will really cause fruit to come out of our lives, and not just fruit, but spiritual multiplication. So keep at it.
Thank you so much. Kuya Frank, any last encouragement?
No, this has just been a great time. Thank you so much for all the things that you've shared.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Nari, and we're looking forward from learning from you this coming DMin program. And we are excited, actually. I think excited is an understatement. So this
Thanks for
coming
having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Frank and Neil, for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so, for those who are viewing us, we will still have another webinar this coming Tuesday. I think it's a town hall meeting from IGSL leaders, and then after that, we'll have a number of webinars that are lined up. Dr. Gary McIntosh will be helping us also in leading through this crisis. So just join us every Tuesday, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock in our iron sharpening moments. So, in behalf of Dr. Frank Pardue and Dr. Narry Santos, I would like to thank Milton, Saul, and Kim, and Andy for helping us backstage. And God bless you all. Keep on serving, keep on loving, and keep on smiling. This is
Amen.
Mamburam saying good night.
Good night.
Good night.
The current global pandemic brought the world more agony than ever. As we continue to lament, we ought to be asking the question, how can we become faithful followers of Jesus in the midst of suffering and pain? Needless to say, a better understanding of discipleship is an ever-growing need of the global church, especially in these unprecedented and uncharted times. Discipleship is a central theme in the Gospel of Mark. It unpacks the way of discipleship in a time of suffering, as modeled by Jesus, the suffering Messiah. How relevant are discipleship principles in the Gospel of Mark in our Asian church setting? Dr. Narry Santos is teaching a Doctor of Ministry course on discipleship in the Gospel of Mark in the Asian context, which is an online course running from August 10th to 21st. Log on to www.igsl.asia for more information about our academic programs.